violating it. Now, the most recent case, crucial case, is June 2008. There was a ceasefire that was instituted. It called for opening the border crossings, quoting, to allow the transfer of all goods that were banned and restricted to go into Gaza. Israel agreed, but immediately announced that it would not open the borders until Hamas released Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier who was captured by Hamas in June 2006, the end of that ceasefire. Well, that's another mantra, incidentally. Everybody's heard about Gilad Shalit and the terrible crime of capturing him and how, till he's released, how can you move towards peace? But that's just more hypocrisy. In fact, the hypocrisy is so blatant, it really is an oppressive feat for Western journalism, especially American journalism and intellectual culture, to suppress it. One day before Hamas captured Shalit, Israeli soldiers entered Gaza City, and kidnapped 2 civilians, the Muammar brothers. Their names are not known. They brought them to Israel, and of course in violation of international law, to join the thousands of other prisoners held there, close to 1,000 without charge. And of course, that had been regular Israeli practice for a long time. I mentioned some of the cases. Now, kidnapping civilians is a far more serious crime than capturing a soldier of an attacking army. But all that remains in memory, allegedly blocking peace, is the capture of Shalit. Again, that reflects the difference in treatment between human beings on the one side and 2-legged beasts on the other. Now, Shalit should be returned in a fair prisoner exchange, but try to find an honest comment on this anywhere. It was after the capture of Shalit that Israel's military attack passed from vicious to truly sadistic. But it's well to remember that even before his capture in June 2006, Israel had fired more than 7,700 shells at northern Gaza since its September withdrawal, eliciting virtually no comment, maybe none. Israel has maintained the siege ever since it rejected the June 2008 ceasefire that it accepted. A siege is an act of war, justifying massive violence in response. Now, that's a point on which Israel has always insisted when its own access to the outside world is hampered in any way. In fact, it's the justification for major wars. So if that's true, it surely should be a justification for rockets. Israel went so far in the siege as to prevent the UN Relief and Works Administration, the UN agency that keeps Palestinians alive, it kept them from even replenishing their stores. So when the ceasefire broke down, we ran out of food for the 750,000 people who depend on us. That's John Ging, the Irish director of UNRWA, informing the BBC. Well, despite the continuing Israeli siege, again, a serious act of war, rocketing sharply reduced during the period of the ceasefire. The ceasefire broke down last November 4th, with an Israeli raid into Gaza. The raid was very carefully timed, as usual. It came shortly before Hamas Fatah talks in Cairo that were aimed at reconciling their differences and creating a single unified government. That would have been the first such meetings since the Civil War in June 2007 that left Hamas in control of Gaza, and it would have been a significant step towards advancing diplomatic efforts. So it was quite useful to undercut that danger by violating the ceasefire and invading Gaza, killing 6 people. The Civil War itself was instigated by the United States and Israel. It was a very crude attempt to carry out a military coup to overthrow the democratically elected government that the United States opposes. Again, pretty standard practice. Well, the blockade was tightened further after November 4th, disastrous consequences for the population. Both sides escalated violence. All the deaths were Palestinian, and that continued until the ceasefire formally ended on December 19th, and Prime Minister Olmert authorized the full-scale invasion. A few days before that, about a week before, Hamas had proposed to return to the original July ceasefire agreement, which Israel had not observed. That offer was transmitted to a senior official in the Israeli army by Robert Pastor. He's an academic historian and a former Carter administration high official. But Israel did not respond, except by launching the invasion. Of course, Israel was aware of it. The head of Shin Bet, that's the internal security agency, was quoted in Israeli sources on December 21st as saying that Hamas is interested in continuing the calm with Israel while its military wing is continuing preparation for conflict. Okay, so no calm. We'd rather have conflict. Israel's senior diplomatic correspondent, Akiva Eldar, reports that shortly before Israel launched its full-scale invasion on Saturday, December 27th, Hamas, I'm quoting him, Hamas Politburo chief Khalid Mashal proposed ceasefire and return to the arrangement of 2005, which permitted continuous opening of the crossings for desperately needed supplies. The response was the invasion. In a front page think piece on the latest Gaza invasion, New York Times correspondent Stephen Lee Myers writes that in some ways the attack on Gaza was reminiscent of the gamble Israel took in Lebanon in 1982 when it invaded to eliminate the threat of Yasser Arafat's forces. He's correct. There is a similarity and the threat is the same. He's correct, but not in the sense he had in mind. In 1982, as in 2008, the threat was the threat of political settlement, and it was crucially necessary to eliminate that threat. That's, again, standard practice. I mean, it's not that Israel does not want peace. Of course it wants peace. Everyone wants peace. Hitler wanted peace, for example. The question is, on what terms? From its origins, long before the establishment of the state, the Zionist movement has understood that to achieve its goals, it would have to delay political settlement, meanwhile slowly building facts on the ground as the basis for some eventual settlement. Even the occasional agreements, as in 1947, were recognized by the leadership to be temporary steps towards further expansion. The 1982 war is a dramatic illustration of the need for undercutting the threat of political settlement. It was called pretty openly in Israel a war for the West Bank. If we can get rid of the diplomatic efforts of the Palestinians, which were becoming very annoying, we can continue to take over the West Bank at the cost of the destruction of Lebanon and the killing of thousands of people. The 1982 Lebanon war was followed by Israeli support for Hamas so as to undermine the secular PLO and its dangerous peace initiatives. Another case that should be familiar, if it isn't, is Israeli provocations before the 1967 war, which were designed to elicit a Syrian response that could be used as a pretext for Israeli violence and for the takeover of more land. That's at least 80% of the incidents, according to Defense Minister Moshe Dayan. Now, this persistent effort to delay political accommodation has always made perfect sense. It's not irrational.